This is still unanswered. I'm Hana Mori. Tonight, we return to a case that has haunted Tokyo and Japan since the final hours of the year 2000, the Setagaya family murders. 4 members of the Miyazawa family were found dead in their home on December 31, 2000. The violence was brutal. The evidence left behind was enormous. Yet, to this day, the person who did it remains unknown. With me is Dr. Kenji Alvarez Sato, forensic criminologist and former profiler. Kenji, thank you for joining the show.
Thank you, Hana. It's an honor to be here. This case, it's one I've followed for years. The facts are chilling, but the human cost is what stays with me most. A mother, a father, 2 children, and a grandmother left to live with the consequences.
We'll walk through the night, the evidence, the investigations, the theories, and the ways the case has shaped law and public trust in Japan. We'll also talk about why, despite DNA, clothing, and footprints, the killer has not been identified. And we'll do this in a way that centers the victims and the family, because that is essential. Are you ready, Kenji?
Yeah. Ready. Ready as one can be to talk about something so difficult.
Then let's begin with the place and the people. Setagaya 3 Chome, Kamisoshigaya, in western Tokyo, is a residential ward. In December 2000, Japan felt safe, even though the 1990s had been turbulent. People left windows open at night, families trusted their neighborhoods. That trust is part of why this case shocked the nation. Tell listeners who the Miyazawas were, Kenji.
Mikio Miyazawa was 44, a salaryman, often described as a brand consultant. Quiet, devoted to his family. His wife, Yasuko, 41, taught English part-time from home and ran a small class for neighborhood children. The 2 kids, Niina, 8, bright and energetic, and Ray, 6, quieter and reportedly sensitive to noise. Yasuko's mother and sister lived next door in a connected house. It was, by many accounts, a close, ordinary family life.
Ordinary, yes. And the neighborhood was changing. Houses nearby had been vacated for development, making the area quieter at night than usual. The Miyazawa house was a 3-story home back-to-back with the grandmother's house, and the 3rd floor held the bedrooms. The rear of the house faced Soshigaya Park. There was a skateboarding area in the park. That becomes relevant later. On December 30, 2000, everything seemed normal.
Niina spent time next door with her grandmother that afternoon, the last confirmed sighting by someone outside the household. Around 10:38 p.m., Mikio logged into a password-protected email account on the family computer. That is generally accepted as the last confirmed activity of a family member that night. After that, the timeline is reconstructed from forensics.
Which is where it gets precise, and then unsettled. The Tokyo Metropolitan Police estimate the murders occurred between roughly 11:30 p.m. and 12:05 a.m., crossing into the first minutes of December 31. Investigators believe the intruder climbed into the house through the 2nd-floor rear bathroom window. The screen was found on the ground, and there were footprints in the mud outside. From there, what happened is reconstructed by injury patterns, blood spatter, and movement of bodies.
Right. The accepted reconstruction, again built from forensic evidence, is that the perpetrator entered through the bathroom, then moved into the adjacent bedroom where 6-year-old Ray was sleeping. Ray appears to have been strangled in his bed. He was the only family member killed without stab wounds. The intruder then encountered Mikio on or near the stairs. There was a violent struggle. Mikio suffered multiple stab wounds and was found near the stairs. After Mikio was incapacitated, the attacker went up to the third floor and attacked Yasuko and Niina, who were asleep. Yasuko fought fiercely. There were severe defensive wounds, and a blood trail shows she tried to flee, carrying Niina down the stairs before being overtaken.
It's hard to say these things without sounding clinical, but we must. Yasuko's injuries indicate she fought for her children. The overkill, the repeated stabbings, the brutality, these suggest something more than a simple burglary gone wrong. And then, here's the detail that turns the case from violent into uncanny. The killer did not leave right away.
Yes, that is one of the most disturbing aspects. After the murders, the perpetrator appears to have remained in the house for anywhere between 2 and 10 hours. He used the family computer. There was internet activity recorded between about 1:18 a.m. and 1:23 a.m. He helped himself to items from the fridge and kitchen, 4 bottles of barley tea, melon, 4 ice creams. He used the toilet and did not flush. The feces contained undigested food, and that proved invaluable to investigators. He also treated his own cuts using first aid supplies from the house. Cloth bandages, sanitary items, those were found used.
The image is horrifying. Someone sitting in a home, surrounded by bodies, eating ice cream, browsing the computer, and bandaging a bloody hand. To many listeners, that detail is almost impossible to process. Kenji, from a profiling perspective, what do we make of a perpetrator who lingers like that? Why stay?
It's complicated. In profiling, we try to avoid sensational labels like monster and instead look at behavior as communication. Staying in the house can mean several things. 1, a lack of fear of being caught. Maybe the perpetrator had a sense of impunity or believed no one would notice. 2, a psychological state. Disassociation after extreme violence can lead to odd, detached behavior. 3, a ritualistic component. Some offenders derive continued control or gratification from remaining near victims. The Setagaya case could include any of those, or a mixture.
And importantly, we must note that during that stay, the perpetrator left behind a wealth of physical evidence, blood in multiple locations, items of clothing, shoe prints, hair and fibers, and that unflushed toilet containing DNA and dietary clues. This case is, in a forensic sense, oddly generous, yet it remains unsolved. How is that possible?
There are several technical and social reasons. First, DNA is only as useful as your comparison database. If the DNA profile doesn't match anyone in governmental or commercial databases, it yields a profile but not a name. Second, the killer may not have lived in Japan permanently, or may have been a person whose DNA was never lawfully collected. Temporary workers, visitors, foreign residents, people who avoided arrest. Third, the DNA evidence can be degraded or mixed with victim DNA in ways that complicate analysis, especially with the technologies available in 2000. Over time, techniques improved, but you still need a match or an investigative lead.
Let's take a look at some of the key pieces of physical evidence and what they revealed. First, the clothing. A gray sweatshirt with purple raglan sleeves was left at the scene, along with a hat, gloves, scarf, a hip bag, handkerchiefs. Those items were analyzed for fibers, pollen, sand, small traces that can point to where a person has been. The killer also wore shoes, Slathander brand sneakers, models manufactured in South Korea and not widely sold in Japan at the time. That narrowed the potential pool to a degree. Then there was the DNA, blood and fecal DNA, from which investigators constructed a male profile, with some markers suggesting mixed ancestry, though official statements have been cautious on that front. Kenji, these are the raw facts. What can we responsibly infer?
We can say certain things with reasonable confidence. The perpetrator was male. Shoe prints and build suggest a slim to medium build. Age estimates put him somewhere from late teens to maybe mid-30s at the time. The clothing and shoe evidence suggested limited distribution patterns. If only a few thousand units of a particular item were sold in Japan, that gives an investigative advantage. The reported genetic markers indicating mixed ancestry should be treated with caution. Population genetics is complex, and assigning a specific ethnic label from partial markers can mislead. What's useful is the combination of clues: the clothing style, the shoe model, the sand and pollen, the diet from the feces. Together, they create a behavioral and movement map, places the perpetrator likely traveled before or after the crime.
There have been several public appeals over the years. In 2005, police even had officers wear a similar sweatshirt in public, hoping someone would notice. In 2013, they created 3D models of the house. In 2021, the TMPD reported identifying a purchaser of a knife similar to the one used, but that individual's DNA did not match. And in 2025, on the 25th anniversary, police again issued posters and replicas of the clothing to renew interest and tips. Despite these efforts, nothing has led to an arrest. The reward remains, up to 20 million yen. Kenji, what do you think about the long-term investigative strategy?
I think the investigators have done a lot of things right: preserving evidence, re-examining with new technology, public appeals. But there are structural limits. Japan's criminal DNA database in 2000 was limited compared to some other countries. Privacy laws and practices have restrained the use of certain genealogical techniques until recently. Also, the human resource issue. Detectives retire, institutional knowledge can be lost, and cold case units vary in funding and priority. One strength is that this case has stayed alive. Police continue to work it, and that persistence is critical.
Right. Persistence matters. But there are several plausible theories about motive, and each comes with strengths and weaknesses. Let's walk through them. First, the random home invasion or thrill kill theory. The idea that this was an opportunistic, extremely violent break-in by someone seeking to kill. The overkill and lack of financial motive, cash was left behind, argue against mere robbery. Yet the killer's roaming behavior, the apparent lack of planning after entry, could suggest a disturbed, spontaneous offender. Kenji?
We call that the opportunistic or disorganized offender model. It's possible, but it's rare in Japanese residential areas, and some of the perpetrator's actions suggest knowledge of the house. He went straight from the bathroom to Ray's room, used the toilet without flushing, took items from predictable places, and treated wounds with first aid supplies, which requires some awareness of where those supplies are kept. Those details don't rule out disorganization, but they complicate the picture.
Another theory centers on the skate park behind the house. There were ongoing noise complaints. Ray was sensitive to noise. Some have speculated a skater, angry at noise or at the family's complaints, could have targeted them. Supporters of this theory point to the casual, youth-style clothing the killer left behind and to sand and soil traces linking to outdoor recreational areas. But police never found a suspect from the skate community. Kenji, could a local grudge escalate to this level of violence?
It can in rare cases. Conflict escalation exists. But to commit this kind of attack, enter a home at night, attack 4 people, including children, and then remain in the house, requires a degree of dehumanization and rage that usually reflects deeper psychological disturbance. A noise complaint alone seems insufficient as the primary motive, but it could be part of a larger grievance. Importantly, motive is hard to prove without a confession or a clear social link between suspect and family.
A third theory is personal grudge or targeted attack. Someone who knew the family through Mikio's work, Yasuko's classes, or local interactions. The precision of some moves, the confidence inside the house, could point to familiarity. But no credible leads have borne that out. Then there's the idea that the killer had foreign connections. Some reports suggested the DNA hinted at mixed ancestry, and the shoes were manufactured in South Korea, and grains of sand possibly matched overseas profiles. These fragments fed a narrative of a transient, perhaps foreign resident perpetrator. How should we weigh such information?
With extreme caution. Forensics can point to possibilities, not certainties. Shoes manufactured overseas does not equal being foreign. That model could be owned by someone in Japan. Sand and pollen analyses can be suggestive, but global trade and travel muddy the picture. And partial genetic markers should never be turned into ethnic profiling that leads to bias. Investigators must seek leads and test them rigorously. And we, as analysts and as a public, must avoid easy conclusions that stigmatize communities.
That's a careful and necessary caveat. Over the years, online rumor and sensational claims have proliferated. There are articles claiming the case was solved through genetic genealogy, naming supposed suspects with dramatic backstories that link the murders to California or military contractors. These stories get clicks, but they're unverified. Even as of early 2026, major outlets and the Tokyo police treat this as unsolved. We'll talk later about why misinformation is so dangerous, especially for the family.
Yes. Unverified claims can lead to wrongful accusations, harassment, and a false sense of closure that prevents real investigative leads. When amateur sleuthing crosses into identification attempts without solid evidence, it risks ruining lives. At the same time, crowdsourcing can provide tips, but it must be managed carefully and coordinated with law enforcement. The balance is difficult.
Let's return to the scene. 2 details I want to highlight: the unflushed toilet and the computer activity. The killer's feces included undigested food, which helped forensic teams analyze recent meals. That, in combination with traces on clothing, painted movement patterns before and after the crime. And the computer. There was activity around 1:18 to 1:23 a.m. The consensus is that the killer used it, though later activity at 10 a.m. was likely the grandmother who discovered the bodies and accidentally moved the mouse. The 1:18 a.m. activity places him inside the home after the murders. The casualness of using the victim's computer, eating their food, those acts are psychologically revealing. Kenji, what does that say about the offender's mindset?
Using the computer and consuming food suggest comfort or a lack of urgency. For some offenders, it's a way to reassert control or normalcy. I'm in charge here. For others, as I said, it's dissociation. After a hyper-aroused violent episode, some individuals go into a different psychophysiological state where their behavior seems bizarrely calm. Either way, it's significant. The person did not flee immediately, and that increases the chance they'd leave traceable evidence, which they did. That the case remains unsolved despite so much evidence is the real mystery.
One forensic thread worth exploring is the DNA itself. The evidence was generous. Blood mixed with victims' blood in the kitchen, on the stairs, on first aid supplies, and fecal DNA. Over time, technology improved. STR analysis, better sequencing, better extraction from degraded samples. In 2021, police announced they had identified a purchaser of a knife similar to the murder weapon using new visual identification tech, but that person's DNA did not match, so they were excluded. This shows both progress and the frustrating dead ends that continue to surface.
Yes, it's a case study in the limits of forensics. We often think modern science will lead straight to a name. Sometimes it does. But remember, DNA helps most when you can compare it to an actual person's record, or when you can use genetic genealogy to link relatives. Japan has historically been cautious about commercial genealogy databases and the privacy implications of their use. While some countries have solved cold cases through these tools, legal, cultural, and technical constraints have slowed similar approaches here. That said, the work continues, and archives of evidence from 2000 mean new methods can still be applied.
Let's talk about the human aftermath. Haruko, Yasuko's mother, who discovered the bodies around 10:40 a.m., she and her family have been publicly grieving and persistent, appearing in media appeals and cooperating with police for decades. Neighborhoods changed. Some neighbors moved away. The Miyazawa house itself stood as a symbol of unresolved grief. In 2010, discussions about unsolved murders, including this case, helped push Japan to abolish the statute of limitations for capital crimes. That legal change means the case can be prosecuted at any time should a suspect be identified. That's one concrete legacy. Kenji, in your experience, how does the persistence of a case like this affect investigators over time?
It takes a toll. Investigators develop what we sometimes call case ownership, a psychological commitment to solving a case. When that case goes cold, it can lead to long-term stress, sleep problems, and professional frustration. Some detectives stay with cases for decades, refusing to let go. That dedication is admirable, but it can also lead to institutional blind spots if the same theories are recycled without fresh perspectives. What helps is a rotating team, new eyes, regular evidence reanalysis with updated tech, and, crucially, support for the mental health of those working the case.
The public watches, too, and sometimes judges. People ask, how can a case with so much evidence remain unsolved? That question undermines trust. But the reality is complex. Large urban populations mean thousands of people could match some elements. Similar shoe sizes, similar clothing. DNA databases are incomplete. People move, travel, and vanish. And then there's the risk of misinformation, like the articles claiming the case was solved internationally with a named suspect. These can distract and harm the case and the family. We need accuracy and restraint.
Exactly. Speculation fills the vacuum when official answers are absent. That's human. But speculation can also create false narratives. Responsible public curiosity should encourage tips to police and keep attention on cold case resources without amplifying unverified claims. As scientists and journalists, we have an ethical duty to weigh evidence carefully and to protect the dignity of victims and families.
I want to read a small detail from the investigative record because it humanizes the scene. The killer used the family's sanitary items and bandages to dress his own wounds. He smeared extra blood on the floor in several places, perhaps intentionally or perhaps clumsily. He left a gray sweatshirt and a hat. He ate melon and ice cream at night, then slept or rested on the living room sofa. These are mundane acts set against monstrous violence, and they compound the emotional disturbance of the crime. Kenji, when investigators find a mixture of practical behavior, bandaging wounds, and seemingly careless acts, leaving behind identifying items, how does that guide inquiry?
It suggests contradictions in the offender's capacity for planning and self-preservation. On one hand, bandaging shows practical thinking. They sought to stop bleeding, to preserve some functionality. On the other hand, leaving clothing and other items implies a lack of awareness of forensic consequences, or perhaps a sense of invulnerability. Investigators use these contradictions to build a profile, someone capable of practical care, but perhaps impulsive, socially isolated, or lacking criminal sophistication. Again, that doesn't name a person, but it narrows behavioral possibilities. It's important to remember, profiling is probabilistic, not specific.
We should address the online sleuths and their impact. There are Reddit threads, blogs, videos, and articles claiming breakthroughs. Some contributors offer thoughtful analysis, timeline work, mapping, community memory. Others publish sensational claims, sometimes attaching a name to it without official confirmation. These can generate tips, but they also risk misdirecting hope and can harm innocent people. Kenji, from a forensic and ethical perspective, what should amateur investigators keep in mind?
3 key points. 1. Prioritize verifiable evidence, official records, contemporaneous documents, police statements, over hearsay. 2. Avoid public naming without corroborated proof. Naming can destroy lives if wrong. 3. When you have a credible tip, send it to police, documented, not public accusation. Responsible crowdsourcing can help, but it must be coordinated and ethical.
For listeners who might have information, the Seijo police station remains the contact point. Tips are still being received. The reward of up to 20 million yen is active. If you were in the area that night, if you had unusual interactions with someone who matches elements of the profile, if you possess items that could be linked, please consider contacting authorities. And if you're thinking of posting a theory online, please think first about harm and accuracy.
Yes, and one more thing. If you were a young person in the area in 2000, you are now in your late 30s or 40s. Time changes people. A memory that seemed irrelevant in 2000 may be crucial now. So reach out. Don't assume someone else will. Investigators say sometimes a single small recollection breaks a case open.
Let's consider the legal and social legacy. You mentioned earlier the abolition of the statute of limitations for capital crimes in Japan in 2010. The Setagaya case was influential in public debate on that issue. The idea that a killer could escape prosecution by time outraged many. Removing the limit means this case can be prosecuted whenever a suspect is identified, keeping legal avenues open indefinitely. That's an important piece of justice infrastructure, even if it doesn't solve the case by itself.
Absolutely. It's one thing to hope for identification. It's another to know that if identification occurs tomorrow or years from now, prosecution is possible. That matters to victims' families and to public trust in the justice system. It gives investigators a framework to hold on to, and it validates the persistent work of cold case units.
Wow.
Yes.
Before we move toward closing, I want to ask you a personal, professional question, Kenji. After following this case for years, after looking at the evidence and the scene, what theory do you find most plausible, if forced to guess, with every caveat you've mentioned?
If pressed, I'd say the perpetrator is likely someone with some prior familiarity with the neighborhood, enough to choose the rear window entry from Setagaya Park and to know where certain supplies were stored. I also think he was likely young at the time, late teens to mid-20s, given clothing and behavioral patterns. The combination of rage and a dissociative phase could explain the overkill and the lingering, but that remains an informed hypothesis, not a conclusion. The danger is in turning the hypothesis into certainty, and I won't do that. The danger is in turning the hypothesis into certainty, and I won't do that.
That measured uncertainty is exactly what we want to model on this show. We can walk listeners through the most probable scenarios without pretending we have the silver bullet. For the final part of our episode, let's talk about the human story, the family, and then close with what remains possible. Haruko, the grandmother, has been publicly grieving for decades. The house stood as a reminder. The community was traumatized. This case changed conversations about safety and the limits of forensic certainty in Japan.
Yes, the family's suffering is central. The investigations, the publicity, the false leads, all of that compounds grief. For the investigators who couldn't close the case, it's an enduring burden. For the public, the case shifted perceptions. Even in so-called safe societies, extreme violence can and does occur. It reminds us to balance trust with vigilance and tenderness with the pursuit of truth.
As we wrap, I want to be clear about what remains. The case is unsolved as of early 2026. The Tokyo Metropolitan Police continue to accept tips. Modern techniques could still yield answers. DNA technology, combined with ethical genealogy approaches and continued public cooperation, may produce a lead. Someone, somewhere, likely knows a fact that could tie to the perpetrator. We have to believe that and keep asking for information.
And to listeners, if you have anything at all, please contact the Seijo Police Station. And if you're drawn to this case as an intellectual puzzle, remember the people who were killed and the family who still lives with that loss. Curiosity is fine, but compassion must guide it.
Thank you, Kenji, for joining tonight and for guiding us through the forensic and human complexities of this case. To our listeners, if you want to know more, a list of reputable sources is available with this episode. The Japan Times, South China Morning Post, Tokyo Reporter, and others have done thorough reporting. Avoid sites that claim the case is solved without official confirmation. This episode of Still Unanswered was produced and researched with care for the Miyazawa family and for the truth. I'm Hana Mori. Thank you for listening.
Thank you, Hana. And to the Miyazawa family, wherever they are, this story is not forgotten.